They warned her, didn't they? Her family, her friends, everyone. "He'll destroy you," they said. But Sarah Johnson didn't listen. She couldn't not when her heart was so deeply tied to Tyler Brooks, the man she believed was her forever. 7 years, 5 pregnancies, and countless sacrifices later, Sarah was left shattered, betrayed not just by Tyler, but by her best friend Lisa. And when they sent her their wedding invitation just 2 months after breaking her something inside, her snapped. What follows is not just a story of heartbreak, but a descent into a darkness no one saw coming. Stay with us as we unravel the story of love-turned manipulation, betrayal that knew no bounds, and a breaking point that blurred the line between victim and villain. Sarah Johnson was the kind of person everyone admired. She was dependable, kind, and always put others first. Growing up in a small, close-knit town, her life revolved around family values and the belief that love was something pure, something that lifted you up. Her parents adored her, and her older brother was fiercely protective, always warning her to be careful with her heart. Sarah believed in those values, but when Tyler Brooks walked into her life, everything changed. Tyler had a magnetic pull that was hard to ignore. He was the kind of man who could light up a room with his presence. Handsome and confident, he carried himself like someone who owned the world, even though he worked as a mechanic. Tyler had a way of making people feel special, and Sarah wasn't immune to his charm. When she met him during her sophomore year of college, it felt like she had finally found the kind of love people wrote songs about. At first, Tyler seemed perfect. He noticed the little things about Sarah, the way her laugh carried a hint of shyness, or how she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. He made her feel seen in a way no one else ever had. It was overwhelming and intoxicating, and before Sarah knew it, she was swept up in a whirlwind romance. Tyler made her believe she was the center of his world, and she clung to that feeling. But love, as Sarah would later learn, can sometimes blind you to the truth. While she was falling for Tyler's charm, her family was growing concerned. They saw something in him that Sarah couldn't or refused to see. Her parents, who had always been her guiding light, began to voice their unease. They sensed that Tyler wasn't as perfect as he seemed. Her mother's quiet wisdom and her father's firm instincts told them that this relationship might not lead where Sarah hoped it would. Sarah, however, ignored their concerns. She was so wrapped up in Tyler that she began to distance herself from the people who loved her most. Tyler had a way of planting doubts in her mind about her family. He made her feel like they didn't understand their love, that they were trying to control her. Slowly, Sarah started to pull away. Phone calls to her mum became less frequent. Her visits home dwindled. She stopped confiding in her brother, who had always been her closest ally. Tyler was becoming her whole world, and she didn't even realize. Over time, small cracks began to appear in their relationship, though Sarah brushed them aside. Tyler had a possessive streak that revealed itself in subtle ways. He didn't like when Sarah spent time with her friends or made plans that didn't include him. He would sulk or make her feel guilty until she gave in. What Sarah didn't see was how her world was shrinking, piece by piece. The people who once filled her life were slowly being replaced by Tyler, who seemed to demand all her attention. Sarah's friends noticed the change before she did. She became quieter, less lively, and more withdrawn. They tried to reach out, but Sarah always made excuses, convincing herself that Tyler was all she needed. She didn't realize how isolated she had become until it was too late. Tyler's charm had woven itself so tightly around her that she couldn't see the control he was slowly gaining. At first, Sarah told herself that it was just love, that every relationship required sacrifice. She believed that Tyler's intensity was proof of how much he cared. But deep down, a quiet voice whispered that something wasn't right. She ignored it. She had built her life around Tyler, and the thought of losing him was unbearable. She told herself it was just a rough patch, that things would get better if she loved him enough. But as time went on, Sarah began to realize that Tyler wasn't lifting her up, he was weighing her down. Her once bright world had dimmed, and she was left clinging to the illusion of a love that no longer felt real. What she didn't know was that the perfect illusion she had built was about to shatter in ways she could never have imagined. When Sarah Johnson discovered she was pregnant for the first time, a mix of fear and hope washed over her. Deep down, she wanted to believe this could be the beginning of a family with Tyler Brooks. She pictured a life filled with love, joy, and the shared dreams they had talked about so many times. But Tyler didn't share her excitement. He told her it wasn't the right time, that they needed to focus on their future. His words, so calm and convincing, made her second-guess herself. Reluctantly, Sarah agreed, convincing herself that he had their best interests at heart. The guilt of her decision lingered, but Sarah buried it, telling herself that they would have their time when the moment was right. Then it happened again. The second pregnancy brought the same fear and hope, but Tyler's reaction didn't change. He assured her that it was best to wait, that they needed to build a stable life before taking such a big step. Sarah felt her heart sink, but she couldn't bring herself to argue. She wanted to trust him, to believe that he was leading them toward the life they both wanted. By the time Sarah faced a third pregnancy, followed by a fourth and even a fifth, the emotional and physical toll was undeniable. Each time, Tyler's reasons were the same. He wasn't ready, they weren't ready, and each time Sarah went along with it, even as she felt pieces of herself breaking away. The procedures took a heavy toll on her body, leaving her weaker each time. The emotional scars, however, were even deeper. She tried to ignore the growing void inside her, but it was impossible to escape the pain that came with each sacrifice. Her family watched from a distance, heartbroken by the changes they saw in Sarah. Her mother, always her biggest supporter, pleaded with her to come home, to leave Tyler behind and start fresh. But Sarah couldn't face the shame of admitting how much she had sacrificed for a man who gave so little in return. Instead, she assured her family she was fine, repeating the words she desperately wanted to believe. Tyler loved her, she told herself. He just needed more time. But time didn't heal anything. The years passed, and Sarah's sacrifices continued to pile up. Her dreams, once so vibrant and full of hope, faded into the background. Her health deteriorated as the weight of her choices pressed down on her. She grew distant from her family, the shame and guilt creating a barrier she couldn't seem to overcome. Her once bright eyes now carried a sadness she couldn't hide, and her once strong spirit felt worn and fragile. Tyler, meanwhile, carried on as though nothing was wrong. He continued to make promises about their future, always dangling the hope of something better just out of reach. Sarah clung to those promises, desperate to believe that her sacrifices hadn't been in vain. She told herself that if she just held on a little longer, if she just loved him enough, things would change. But deep down, Sarah knew the truth. She had given so much of herself to Tyler that there was little left. Her days felt empty, filled with routines that revolved around him. She rarely looked in the mirror anymore, unable to face the reflection of a woman she barely recognized. The vibrant, hopeful girl who had once dreamed of a bright future was gone, replaced by someone weighed down by years of heartbreak and disappointment. Her family's calls grew less frequent, their voices tinged with concern and sadness. They had tried to save her, to pull her away from Tyler's grip, but Sarah had pushed them away. She couldn't bear to hear their questions or their quiet judgment. She told herself that she didn't need anyone else, that Tyler was her world. But the truth was that she felt completely alone. Sarah's life had become a cycle of giving and sacrificing, with nothing in return. She couldn't see what everyone else could, that Tyler didn't truly value her, that he took her devotion for granted, and with every sacrifice, she lost a little more of herself, leaving her trapped in a life she no longer recognized. Sarah Johnson and Lisa Carter had been inseparable for as long as they could remember. Their bond felt unshakable, built on years of trust, laughter, and shared dreams. Lisa was the sister Sarah never had, the person she leaned on during her toughest moments. Whenever Tyler Brooks let her down or her world felt like it was falling apart, Lisa was there to pick up the pieces. Sarah thought their friendship was unbreakable, but Lisa had her own secrets, and one of them was a quiet envy she never shared with Sarah. It started gradually, almost innocently. Tyler began confiding in Lisa, sharing frustrations about his relationship with Sarah. Lisa, instead of defending her best friend, found herself drawn to the attention Tyler gave her. His charm, the way he made her feel seen and important, was something she didn't want to let go of. What began as harmless conversations soon turned into something more, a dangerous connection that neither of them tried to stop. Sarah began to notice changes in Lisa. Her once constant calls became infrequent. Lisa seemed distant, her warmth replaced with a cold detachment Sarah couldn't explain. Still, Sarah ignored the signs, clinging to the hope that Lisa was just busy. She couldn't imagine that the person she trusted most could betray her so deeply. One quiet Saturday afternoon, Sarah decided to surprise Lisa with a visit. She wanted to show her gratitude for all the times Lisa had been there for her, so she bought a small gift and drove to Lisa's apartment. As she pulled up, she noticed Tyler's car parked outside. A knot formed in her stomach, but she brushed it off, telling herself there must be an explanation. Maybe they were planning something for her, she thought, trying to push away the unease, creeping into her mind. With the spare key Lisa had given her years ago, Sarah let herself into the apartment. She walked in quietly, planning to leave the gift and head out. But the sound of laughter stopped her in her tracks. It wasn't just any laughter. She recognized Tyler's deep chuckle, followed by Lisa's familiar giggle. Her chest tightened. As she moved further inside, her heart pounding with a mix of dread and disbelief, when she stepped into the living room, the scene before her shattered her world. Tyler and Lisa were sitting together on the couch, their closeness undeniable. Lisa's hand rested on Tyler's arm, and the way he looked at her was filled with an intimacy Sarah had once thought was reserved for her. The betrayal was written in every detail of their body language, and it was unmistakable. Sarah stood frozen, her mind racing as the reality of what she was seeing sank in. This wasn't just a moment of weakness. It was a betrayal that had been brewing for months, hidden behind the facade of friendship and love. The trust she had placed in Tyler and Lisa crumbled into nothingness. Her heart broke, and her emotions poured out in a storm of tears. She didn't understand how they could do this to her after everything she had sacrificed. But as she stood there, shattered and vulnerable, Tyler's response was cold and calculated. He didn't apologize or explain. Instead, he twisted the situation, placing the blame on Sarah. In his mind, she was the problem, the reason their relationship had failed. Lisa said nothing, her silence cutting deeper than words ever could. Sarah left the apartment that day feeling like a shell of herself. The two people she had loved and trusted most in the world had betrayed her in the cruelest way imaginable. She drove home in a haze, tears streaming down her face, her mind replaying the devastating scene over and over. Her world felt like it had been turned upside down, and she didn't know how to put the pieces back together. For weeks, Sarah isolated herself. She couldn't bring herself to face her family or friends. The shame of what had happened was too much to bear. She felt like a failure, unable to see the warning signs, unable to stop what had unfolded. Her mind was consumed with questions she couldn't answer. How had she not seen this coming? How could Lisa, her best friend, and Tyler, the man she had devoted herself to, betray her so completely? Then, 2 months later, the final blow arrived in the mail. A delicate envelope, elegant and understated, bore her name. Sarah opened it with trembling hands, and her breath caught as she read the contents. It was a wedding invitation. Tyler and Lisa were getting married. The weight of the betrayal hit her all over again. Not only had they taken everything from her, but now they were flaunting their relationship for the world to see. The date was set, the celebration planned, and Sarah was expected to endure the humiliation of watching them build a future together. The pain was unbearable. Sarah sat in her apartment, clutching the invitation as tears streamed down her face. She thought about the 7 years she had given Tyler, the sacrifices she had made, and the love she had poured into their relationship. She thought about the trust she had placed in Lisa, the bond they had shared, and how it had all been destroyed. The anger began to simmer beneath the surface, growing with every passing moment. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it felt like an attack on her very identity. Tyler and Lisa had taken everything from her, and left her with nothing but the pieces of a shattered life. And now, with their wedding looming, Sarah knew she couldn't stay silent. Something had to change. Something had to give. The heartbreak she had carried for months began to transform. The sadness, the despair, the helplessness, all of it shifted into something darker. As the days passed and the wedding drew closer, Sarah's mind became consumed with thoughts of revenge. She couldn't stop picturing Tyler and Lisa standing at the altar, smiling and happy, living the life she had dreamed of for so long. The thought of them celebrating their love while she was left to pick up the pieces of her broken life was too much to bear. Sarah knew she couldn't let it go. She couldn't let them win. Her heartbreak had reached its breaking point, and she wasn't sure if she could ever come back from it. Sarah's world fell apart that day, leaving her with nothing but heartbreak and emptiness. She moved back in with her parents, her once strong spirit shattered into pieces. Her mother embraced her with unwavering love, trying to ease the pain, but no amount of comfort could fully heal the wounds. Sarah felt like a shell of her former self, haunted by everything she had endured. The wedding invitation was a constant reminder of her betrayal. It sat on her nightstand, mocking her, its elegant design a cruel symbol of what Tyler and Lisa were about to celebrate. Tyler, the man she had poured every ounce of love into, and Lisa, the friend she had trusted above all, were moving forward as if Sarah had never mattered. Every glance at the invitation stirred a mix of anger and despair deep within her. As the days passed, Sarah's emotions began to shift. The sorrow that once consumed her gave way to something sharper. Anger grew, simmering beneath the surface, relentless and unyielding. She couldn't stop picturing them together, smiling, celebrating, a future built on her pain. The thought of their happiness felt unbearable, a cruel injustice she couldn't ignore. When the day of the wedding arrived, Sarah awoke with an eerie calmness. She made up her mind she wasn't going to disrupt anything, or so she told herself. She just needed to see it for herself, to understand how they could do this to her. Carefully, she chose her outfit, a simple yet elegant dress that reflected none of the chaos inside her. Her makeup was flawless, masking the emotional storm raging beneath the surface. As she stared at her reflection, she barely recognized herself. The woman in the mirror wasn't the same Sarah who had once believed in love and trust. This was someone hardened by betrayal and pain. The wedding venue was beautiful, every detail carefully curated for a perfect celebration. Flowers adorned the hall, candles cast a warm glow, and soft music filled the air. Guests mingled, their laughter and chatter creating an atmosphere of joy. Sarah slipped in unnoticed, blending into the crowd as she found a seat near the back. Her eyes locked onto the altar where Tyler and Lisa stood, radiant in their happiness. Watching them was like a dagger to Sarah's heart. Tyler gazed at Lisa with the same adoration he had once shown Sarah, and Lisa smiled back as if nothing in the world could touch them. The vows they exchanged, filled with promises of forever, echoed through the hall, each word tearing at Sarah's fragile composure. They were celebrating a love built on the ruins of everything Sarah had given, and it was too much to bear. As Sarah sat there, the emotions surged within her. Pain, anger, humiliation, and a deep sense of betrayal collided in her mind. Her hands trembled as she reached into her bag, her fingers brushing against the cold, hard object hidden within. The touch grounded her, forcing her to confront the memories that led her to this moment. The sacrifices she had made, the love she had given, and the trust that had been shattered played on a loop in her mind. She couldn't sit still anymore. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, suffocating and relentless. Slowly she stood, her movements deliberate. Each step she took toward the altar felt heavier than the last, the tension in the room growing with every passing second. Guests turned their heads to watch her, murmurs spreading through the crowd. All eyes were on her now, but Sarah didn't care. She was beyond fear, beyond hesitation. All that remained was the storm of emotions driving her forward. As she approached the altar, Tyler and Lisa finally noticed her presence. Their smiles faded, replaced by confusion and unease. Sarah's gaze was fixed on Tyler, unblinking, unflinching. Her hand tightened around the object in her bag, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Every memory, every heartbreak, every betrayal surged within her, propelling her toward a moment she couldn't turn away from. The sound of sirens echoed in the air as Sarah sat silently in the back of the police car. Her hands were cuffed and her face was expressionless, but inside, her heart was heavy with the weight of everything that had just happened. The chaos of the wedding, the screaming guests, the overturned chairs and the shocked faces was behind her now. But the consequences of her actions were only beginning to unfold. News of what happened spread like wildfire. Within hours, Sarah's name and face were everywhere. Headlines painted her as a scorned lover turned violent. The story captured the public's attention, and people couldn't stop talking about it. Everyone had an opinion. Was Sarah a victim or a villain? The whispers and debates grew louder, and strangers dissected her life as if it was theirs to judge. When the trial began, it became a media sensation. The courtroom was packed every day, and reporters lined up outside to cover every detail. People were fascinated by the drama of it all, the years of sacrifice, the betrayal by her best friend, and the ultimate act of violence at the wedding. The prosecution argued that Sarah was consumed by jealousy and rage, a woman who couldn't handle rejection. They described her actions as cold and calculated, pointing out how she walked into the wedding with a weapon hidden in her bag. But the defense told a different story. They painted Sarah as a woman who had endured years of emotional manipulation and heartbreak. They spoke of how Tyler had isolated her from her family, broken her spirit, and left her emotionally shattered. They revealed the toll of the repeated pregnancies she terminated because Tyler always said it wasn't the right time. They showed how Sarah had given everything she had, her love, her health, and her future, only to be discarded when Tyler found someone new. Sarah's own testimony was raw and heartfelt. She spoke of how much she had loved Tyler and how deeply Lisa's betrayal had hurt her. She described the sacrifices she had made, believing that if she gave enough, Tyler would one day see her worth. She admitted to losing herself in the process, clinging to a relationship that had taken everything from her. "I wasn't just angry," she explained. "I was broken." The public was divided. Some saw Sarah as a victim, a woman driven to her breaking point by years of pain and betrayal. Others saw her as selfish and unstable, someone who allowed her emotions to lead her down a dark path. The debates played out online and in living rooms across the country. Could heartbreak ever justify violence? How much betrayal could one person endure before they snapped? When the jury reached their decision, the courtroom was silent. Sarah was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. The sentence sparked even more debate. Some believed it was too harsh, while others argued it was too lenient. But for Sarah, the verdict was final. Her life as she had known it was over. Inside her prison cell, Sarah began to reflect on everything that had led her to this point. The days were long and quiet, giving her plenty of time to think. She wrote letters to her family, apologizing for the pain she had caused, and thanking them for still loving her despite everything. In one letter to her mother, she admitted how much she regretted not listening to her family's warnings about Tyler. "I gave him everything," she wrote, "and in the end I had nothing left of myself." Sarah started attending therapy, sessions offered in the prison. For the first time, she began to understand how much Tyler had manipulated her over the years. She realized how isolated and powerless she had felt, and how Lisa's betrayal had been the final blow. The therapy didn't erase the guilt or the pain, but it gave her the tools to start rebuilding herself piece by piece. Her story became a cautionary tale, discussed in podcasts, articles, and documentaries. People couldn't stop asking questions. How much pain can one person take before they break? And when they do break, who is truly at fault? While strangers debated her life, Sarah focused on surviving in the harsh reality of prison. She began writing daily, filling pages with her thoughts, regrets, and hopes for a better future. She also joined support groups, finding strength in the stories of other women who had endured heartbreak and loss. Years passed, and Sarah slowly began to reclaim pieces of herself. She found small joys in the monotony of prison life, like helping younger inmates navigate their own struggles. It wasn't redemption, but it gave her a sense of purpose. She knew she couldn't undo what she had done, but she wanted to learn how to live with it. Her story, once one of love and devotion, had become a story of survival and reckoning. She thought often about the woman she had been before Tyler entered her life, hopeful, full of dreams and surrounded by the love of her family. She wondered how different her life might have been if she had listened to her mother's gentle warnings or her father's stern advice. But regret was a heavy burden, and Sarah learned that dwelling on the past wouldn't change anything. Instead, she focused on moving forward, even within the confines of her cell. She continued writing letters to her family, reconnecting with the people she had pushed away when she was with Tyler. Their forgiveness was a lifeline, a reminder that she was still loved, despite her mistakes. The years stretched on, and Sarah's name faded from the headlines, replaced by new scandals and tragedies. But for those who knew her story, she remained a haunting reminder of how love can turn toxic, and how betrayal can drive even the kindest heart to unimaginable actions. For Sarah, her life became about finding peace, even in a place where peace was hard to come by. She couldn't change the past, but she was determined to find a way to live with it. Slowly, she began to forgive herself, one day at a time.